The 8,831st meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Afghanistan. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Afghanistan to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Deborah Lyons, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, and Ms. Shahrazad Akbar, Chairperson of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Deborah Lyons. You have the floor, please. Your microphone is off. Can you kindly?
No, it's not.
Yeah, please start. Please start.
No.
It's okay now. Yeah.
It's okay now? Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. President and members of the Security Council, I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity of this special meeting on Afghanistan and the opportunity to brief you today. It is particularly important because Afghanistan is now at a dangerous turning point. Ahead lies either a genuine peace negotiation or a tragically intertwined set of crises. An increasingly brutal conflict combined with an acute humanitarian situation and multiplying human rights abuses. But today we have an opportunity to demonstrate the commitment of the UN Security Council and the regional and international community that you represent to prevent Afghanistan from descending into a situation of catastrophe, so serious that it would have few, if any, parallels in this century. And let me assure you, such a catastrophe would have consequences far beyond the borders of Afghanistan. I do believe that the Security Council and the broader international community can help prevent the most dire scenarios. But it will require acting in unity and acting quickly. It will require acting. In the past weeks, the war in Afghanistan has entered a new, deadlier, and more destructive phase. The Taliban campaign during June and July to capture rural areas has achieved significant territorial gains. From this strengthened position, they have begun to attack the larger cities. The provincial capitals of Kandahar, Herat, and Lashkargah, in particular, have come under significant pressure. This is a clear attempt by the Taliban to seize urban centers with the force of arms. The human toll of this strategy is extremely distressing, and the political message is even more deeply disturbing. Regarding the human toll, let me provide you with some evidence. Fighting has been especially severe in Lashkargah, the capital of Helmand province. Since 28th of July, just a mere 10 days ago, at least 104 civilians were killed and 403 wounded, as registered by the two main hospitals. Ground engagements and airstrikes are causing most of the civilian harm. All roads leading to and going out of the city are closed by the Taliban. Hospitals have nearly reached full capacity and can no longer accept patients. The available food supply in the city is fastly diminishing, which raises the possibility of an acute food shortage in the coming days, as well as the shortage of medical supplies. In Kandahar, since the start of the offensive there on the 9th of July, a month ago, more than 460 civilian casualties have been registered. Further, to the west, in and around Herat, UNAMA has credible reports of over 135 civilian casualties from the onset of the Taliban offensive. Let me quickly summarize that just in these 3 cases, I am talking of over 1,000 casualties just in this last month. In addition, homes, hospitals, shops, bridges, and other infrastructure are being destroyed. In this dire situation, the UN and humanitarian partners continue to be present to assess, of course, the needs and, where possible, to deliver assistance where we have the access. But this is becoming increasingly difficult. Mr. President, this is now a different kind of war, reminiscent of Syria recently, or Sarajevo in the not-so-distant past. To attack urban areas is to knowingly inflict enormous harm and cause massive civilian casualties. Nonetheless, the threatening of large urban areas appears to be a strategic decision by the Taliban, who have accepted the likely carnage that will ensue. Afghanistan National Security and Defense Forces are defending these cities. But this defense will also undoubtedly cause civilian casualties. Urban warfare will also inflict daily miseries when basic infrastructure, such as electricity and water networks, are damaged. These tactics may amount to serious violation of international human law for which individuals can be held accountable, and may quickly amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The suffering caused by war comes on top of an already increasing humanitarian crisis, with severe drought affecting the country. 18.5 million people, or nearly half of the country's population, is in need of humanitarian assistance. And yet, in the meantime, attacks on aid workers continue, with more than 25 aid workers killed and over 60 injured in just the first 6 months of this year. Mr. President, for the past 3 years, members of the international community, including members of this council and UNAMA, have dealt with the Taliban as a potential partner for peace. We have had numerous discussions with their political representatives in Doha aimed at ending the conflict and finding a true political consensus. Many of us have done this with some reservations, but with a relentless hope for the Afghan people. We have accepted this in the name of peace that ordinary Afghans so desperately need. There had been an expectation when the US Taliban deal was signed in February of 2020, you will remember, that we would see a reduction of violence. We did not. There had been an expectation when the talks between the Afghan Republic and the Taliban began in September of last year that we would see a reduction of violence. We have not. There had been an expectation that when international troops left, we would see a reduction of violence. We did not. Instead, despite significant concessions for peace, we have seen a 50% increase in civilian casualties, with the certainty of many more as the cities are attacked. There is a striking contrast between the activity on the battlefield and the quiet stalemate at the negotiation table in Doha, where we should be seeing the opposite: quiet on the battlefield and engagement around the negotiating table. Mr. President, I have focused today on the war against cities because a party that was genuinely committed to a negotiated settlement would not risk so many civilian casualties, because it would understand that the process of reconciliation will be more challenging the more blood is shed. It would also recognize that they cannot risk the destruction of infrastructure that would be badly needed to rebuild the country once an agreement is reached. It should be made clear to the Taliban Political Commission that the exemptions to the travel ban and the high protocol with which they have been received by many of the countries were in fact predicated on a commitment and progress in the peace process. Mr. President, what is reportedly happening in areas under Taliban control is also of great concern to us. It is heartbreaking to hear, for example, reports of summary executions, beatings, and clampdown on media. Radio stations in particular have stopped broadcasting. And of course, we also hear the fears voiced to UNAMA by many Afghan women. They tell us that they fear they will be killed if the Taliban return to power simply because they worked for the government or an NGO. They fear they will not be able to have access to medical or educational services. These are the real concerns of people who are close to the edges of the Taliban advance. But, Mr. President, let me be clear, because I know that the Taliban also pay attention to what we say in these sessions. I am reporting comments that have been expressed directly to us, not incidents that we have been fully able to confirm. We have also seen the Taliban denials, but these reports that we are receiving from ordinary Afghans throughout the country are so consistent, so uniform, and so urgent that we simply cannot wait for them to be proven before bringing them to your attention. I would add that these fears seem also to be corroborated by the large numbers of people seeking to leave Afghanistan. We expect both irregular and legal migration numbers to double this year. This increase logically must either be a response to the prospect of greater conflict or the desire to not live under Taliban governance. Mr. President, in speaking to Afghans, the impression I have now is of a population waiting apprehensively for a dark shadow to pass over the bright futures they once imagined. It is difficult to me to describe the mood of dread we are faced with every day. As one Afghan put it to us recently, we are no longer talking about preserving the progress and the rights we have gained. We are talking about mere survival. Another woman told us that she sometimes regrets that she had educated her daughter, as that had put her daughter in a more vulnerable position. Council members, Mr. President, for all of us who are parents of daughters, I can hardly think of a more despondent comment. Afghans facing this coming darkness with a sense of being abandoned by the regional and international community. They expect far greater engagement and visible support from you as the Council mandated to maintain international peace and security. In this regard, your statement of the 4th of August condemning the attack against the UN office in Herat was greatly appreciated by us for the show of support for UNAMA, but more importantly, for the call again for an end to the violence and a resumption of a meaningful peace process. This solidarity matters to Afghans. They need to hear and see more of it in actions and in words. But, Mr. President, there are also several important opportunities in the near future where our words and our actions could help bring an end to this war. Next week, there will be meetings in Doha of a number of the special representatives of the key countries, including a meeting of the extended Troika. And we, of course, will meet here again on the 10th of September for the regularly scheduled Security Council briefing on Afghanistan. And so, how can we use these opportunities to address the deteriorating situation that we face? First, the Security Council must issue an unambiguous statement that attacks against cities must stop now. Second, those countries that meet with the Taliban Political Commission should insist in these meetings on a general ceasefire, a resumption of the negotiations, as well as reiterate the position of the Security Council and that of the regional and international communities that a government imposed by force in Afghanistan will not be recognized. Third, as I have already mentioned, the travel ban exemption on Taliban members exists to allow them to travel for the sole purpose of peace negotiations. The exemption is to be renewed on the 20th of September. Further extension must be predicated on real progress on peace. Fourth, the Council and those states who meet with the Taliban must urge them to grant humanitarian access to areas it controls and commit to humanitarian ceasefires in contested areas. If it will not agree to the general ceasefire that truly the Afghans really require. And at the same time, member states should contribute to the severely underfunded humanitarian appeal for Afghanistan. This humanitarian appeal right now stands at only 30% funded. Number 5, we need to put on notice the architects and perpetrators of the most serious violations of human rights. UNAMA strongly supports greater efforts by the United Nations and regional and international community to find ways to hold the perpetrators accountable. 6, the Council should give serious consideration to providing the United Nations with a mandate that allows it to play, when requested by both parties, a greater role in facilitating the negotiations. Mr. President and members of the Council, we will meet again to discuss Afghanistan in little over a month, but we cannot wait. These next weeks will be decisive, but I am absolutely convinced that whatever happens on the battlefield, whether the Taliban take additional cities or whether the government regains districts, the result will only prolong Afghanistan's agony. We, as the members of the regional and international community, so well represented here by this Council, must put aside our own differences on the question of Afghanistan and send a strong signal, not only in our public statements, but also in our bilateral communications with both parties. That is essential to stop fighting and negotiate in that order. Otherwise, there may be nothing left to win. Thank you for this opportunity. The people of Afghanistan are listening to us.
I thank Ms. Deborah Lyons for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Shahrazad Akbar. You have the floor, please. Your microphone seems to be off. Your microphone, please.
You can move to the next speaker while she's sorting out the
Yeah.
technical difficulties.
That's it. I think your microphone is still not connected. Yeah, I think we'll move to the next speaker and come back to you. It'll give you a little bit of time to get this sorted out. So I now give the floor to the representative of Afghanistan. You have the floor, Excellency.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning, Mr. President and members of the Council. I'm honored to make the statement on behalf of my Foreign Minister, His Excellency Mohammad Hani Fatmar, who very much wanted to be here with you but could not travel due to travel to New York due to short notice. Allow me to first congratulate India for assuming the presidency of the Council, and equally congratulate France for successfully finishing its tenure. I would like to also thank Government of India, Norway, and Estonia as the pinholders and the rest of the Security Council members in responding positively to our request to brief the Council about the alarming developments in Afghanistan. This meeting also highlights the Security Council's commitment to ensuring that the people of Afghanistan are able to live in peace, security, and dignity enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In this regard, I should also like to welcome the Security Council statement of 4 August, condemning the terrorist attack on UN compound in Herat and the recent increase in the level of violence in the country. Let me also thank SRSG Lyons for her thoughtful briefing and highlighting the alarming threat and serious concern about the situation in Afghanistan. Mr. President, we're compelled to ask for this urgent meeting as the situation in Afghanistan has been rapidly deteriorating due to recent escalation of violence by the Taliban and their brutal military offensives on major cities and population centers in several provinces. In gross contradiction of the Doha Peace Agreement, the UN Security Council Resolution 2513, and of the regional and international consensus embodied in the extended Troika and the Heart of Asia Istanbul process, the Taliban have launched brutal military offensives, already causing massive death, destruction, displacement, and instability in Afghanistan and beyond. What is even more alarming is their attacks on cities, including Kandahar, Herat, Lashkargah, Ghazni, Sheberghan, and Zaranj as of yesterday. And this was also confirmed by SRSG. Millions of people are now vulnerable to indiscriminate shelling, death, injuries, destruction, and displacement. Our cities and public infrastructure that we have rebuilt with your support over the past 2 decades are now exposed to unimaginable level of Taliban destruction. In this deliberate act of barbarism, the Taliban are not alone, and they are assisted by foreign fighters from transnational terrorist networks. Together, they are threatening our peace, security, and stability, not only in Afghanistan, but also in our region and beyond. It is our collective responsibility to stop them from destroying Afghanistan and threatening the world community. The scale, scope, and timing of their military offensive is akin to an invasion unprecedented in the last 30 years of our conflict. Since mid-April, the Taliban and their affiliate foreign terrorist groups have launched more than 5,500 attacks in 31 of the 34 provinces of Afghanistan. These attacks have been launched with direct support of more than 10,000 foreign fighters representing 20 groups, including Al-Qaeda, LET, TTP, IMU, ETIM, and ISIL, who entered our country and are fighting alongside Taliban against our population and security forces. There's mounting evidence that the East Turkestan Islamic Movement and the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, which have pledged allegiance to ISIL, fought alongside Taliban in Faryab, Jozjan, Takhar, and Badakhshan provinces, where they are currently present with their families under Taliban control. The link between Taliban and these transnational terrorist groups is stronger today than at any point in recent times. Just as indicated numerous times by the sanction monitoring team of the UN Security Council, the Taliban, contrary to their commitments under their Doha Agreement, have not broken ties with their regional and international terrorist organizations. In fact, these links are unbreakable, as they have been cultivated and built on shared ideology, interest and goals, and intermarriages, which have been translated into joint attacks, logistical, and material support. The implication of allowing this network to continue to grow inside the country carries great security risk, not only for Afghanistan, but also for the wider region and even the world. This is a shared risk and concern to all of us, as they are not the Taliban of the 21st century coming from the isolated madrasas, but the manifestation of the nexus between transnational terrorist networks and transnational criminal organizations. Their links to drugs, to smuggling, to robbing of our natural resources is unprecedented. And those who encourage and participate with them, of course, are the beneficiaries. Therefore, this is not a civil war, but a war of criminalized and terrorist networks fought on the back of Afghans. Importantly, the Taliban continue to enjoy a safe haven and supply and logistic line extended to their war machine from Pakistan. Graphic reports and video of Taliban fighters congregating close to the Durand line to enter Afghanistan, fundraising events, transfer of dead bodies for mass burial, and treatment of injured Taliban in Pakistani hospitals are emerging and are widely available. This is not only a naked violation of the 1988 UN Security Council sanction regime, but also leads to further erosion of trust and confidence towards establishing a collaborative relationship with Pakistan to end the war in Afghanistan. Consistent with the agreement of the leadership of Afghanistan and Pakistan in Tashkent last month, we urge Pakistan to help with removing and dismantling of Taliban sanctuaries and supply line and establish with us a joint monitoring and verification mechanism to make the fight against terrorism and international effort for peace effective and credible. Let me reiterate here that Afghanistan desires nothing but friendly relation and peaceful coexistence with Pakistan based on mutual respect for each other's sovereignty. Mr. President, we are alarmed by reports and incidences of gross human rights violation by the Taliban and their foreign terrorist associate in almost half of our country. And we are extremely concerned about the safety and security of people in cities under Taliban attacks and what brutality would await them. I'm glad to see Mr. Shahzad Akbar, chairwoman of the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission, to shed further light on this. But shocking and heart-wrenching images and videos of Taliban's brutality and cruelties against civilian population and people suspected of working for the government and international forces are emerging in social media, which are too graphic to even describe them in my statement here. Suicide bombings, summary execution, revenge killing, stoning to death, chopping of hands, flogging of children, forced marriages, and restricting women and girls' movement are a common occurrence in area under Taliban control and are sanctioned by Taliban religious fatwas. Sadly, this morning, Taliban terrorists killed one of our bravest and sons of Afghanistan, Mr. Dawa Khan, who was the head of the Afghan Media and Communication Center. This is in sharp contrast to Taliban's claim of moderation and respect for international law or even Sharia law. Yes, the Taliban have changed, but for the worst. They have become more violent in their action, cruel in treatment of local population, more extremist in their thinking, and revengeful against sympathizers of the government. The imposition of Taliban's draconian rule has portrayed no positive change from the ideologies that dominated the thinking of the so-called Islamic Emirates of the 90s and what is espoused by ISIS and other extremist groups today. Mr. President, the indiscriminate level of violence exhibited by the Taliban has exacerbated already dire humanitarian situation in the country caused by drought and the pandemic. Since the start of their offensive, more than 5,300 civilians, including 1,960 women and children, have been killed and injured, while thousands other have been displaced. This adds to the burden of approximately 4.8 million people displaced in a country and 8.4 million people who are in need of humanitarian assistance. These numbers could easily increase exponentially if attacks against big population centers and cities continue unabated. Therefore, the Council must act and prevent a catastrophic situation. The fall of 10 border crossings to the Taliban has led to suspension of trade and a surge in prices of primary goods, which is further adding to the misery of the population affected by decades of conflict. Taliban attacks have also come with a great cost to public infrastructure, signifying losses of millions of dollars and years of development investment. During this period, the Taliban have destroyed more than 260 public buildings, including schools, hospitals, bridges, and communication towers. Taliban's destruction of public and private infrastructure has deprived over 13 million people of public services and has amounted to more than $500 million of damage. Mr. President, we are confident in the bravery and professionalism of our national defense and security forces to defend the Republic, which is the manifestation of our values and determination to fight for our homeland and for the future of our children. In recent days, we have witnessed an immense demonstration of support from Afghans within and outside the country for our security forces. Our defense of the Islamic Republic has turned into a national resistance movement, and our people have spoken loud that they do not want to go back to the Taliban's dark era of the 90s. Peace has been the most urgent need and demand of the Afghan people, and achieving peace is the uppermost priority for the Afghan government. To realize this, President Ghani has repeatedly called on the Taliban to adhere to a ceasefire and engage in meaningful negotiations. To support the peace talks, my government has offered a peace plan and made painful concessions, including the release of over 6,000 prisoners of Taliban, most of whom have returned to battlefields. But the Taliban continue to defy and ignore the call of the international community, and more specifically of this Council, to cease their hostilities toward our people and engage in meaningful peace talks. As the departure of foreign troops from Afghanistan has been nearly complete, this clearly shows that the Taliban and their foreign associates are fighting for power to turn our country once again into a safe haven of transnational terrorism, which will no doubt pose a threat to the region and the global community. Mr. President, against this grim and disturbing situation unfolding in my country, it's high time for the Council to use every means at its disposal to compel the Taliban to end their campaign of violence and terror against our people and to prevent further bloodshed and urge them to return to talks. We ask the Council to use existing tools, including the effective implementation of the sanction regime under Resolution 1988 and UN Security Council Resolution 2513, to pressure the Taliban to engage in meaningful peace talks with the government negotiating team. We request the Council to discharge its responsibilities under the United Nations Charter and take all necessary measures to stop Taliban's attack on big cities and population centers. Currently, 6 cities of Herat, Lashkargah, Kandahar, Ghazni, Zaranj, and Sheberghan are under Taliban attack, and soon other cities, including Kabul, will be targeted. We ask the Council and call on the international community to take preventive measures, including convening of a special session of the Security Council and the Human Rights Council to avert a catastrophic situation of human rights violation and large-scale displacement of civilian population, which we've witnessed in the Middle East and other conflicts around the world. We have an opportunity to stop this now. We would like to request the Council and the United Nations Secretary General to provide support to the ongoing peace talks in Doha and the regional and international meetings planned next week in Doha to achieve the goal of preventing Taliban attacks on cities and of reaching political settlement and ceasefire. We appreciate and support the role of the UN Secretary General's personal envoy for Afghanistan, Mr. Jean Arnaud, and Special Representative in Kabul, Ms. Deborah Lyons. And finally, we call on our friends and partners to support our government's new security plan to stabilize Afghanistan and protect the region and the international community against the scourge of international terrorism. In conclusion, I would like to express my appreciation to the steadfast support of the Security Council members and their principal positions in difficult times for Afghanistan. I hope that today's discussion will not only contribute to the peace efforts underway in Doha, but also send a strong message to the Taliban about the Council's determination to hold them accountable to their commitment and promises in finding a peaceful solution to the current conflict. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan for his statement. I now give the floor to Ms. Shahrazad Akbar. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Mr. President, thank you. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the Security Council. I'd like to thank India, the President of UN Security Council, and Permanent Mission of Afghanistan for inviting me to provide a briefing about the ongoing conflict and the violations of international humanitarian law in Afghanistan. I know many Afghans across Afghanistan are waiting to hear about the messages and outcomes of the special meeting of the Council, as the Afghan cities and villages are burning in conflict. Civilians are experiencing extreme levels of harm, and tens of thousands of families are being displaced. Since June 2019, this is the third time I have had the honor of addressing this Council. Every time, the situation in Afghanistan is more critical than before. The situation today could not be more urgent. The first 6 months of 2021 have been the bloodiest 6 months for Afghan civilians since the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission started recording in 2009. 1,677 civilians, including women and children, have been killed, and 3,644 were injured in this period. If the current rates of violence continue, I'm heartbroken to note that there might be a grim new record of civilian harm by end of this year. With districts and now a provincial city falling to the Taliban, millions of Afghans are waiting in terror to see what comes next. Women in particular remember the past and present abuses of Taliban against their freedoms and their persons and dread what's to come. As you know, many are joining the ranks of those trying to flee this worsening storm. Taliban advances and escalation of violence has meant that we in the Commission are verifying details of horrific war crimes on a daily basis. Let me give you 3 examples from our work in recent weeks. In Spin Boldak, Kandahar, our findings confirm that the Taliban dragged out and killed at least 40 civilians associated with government in a campaign of targeted extrajudicial killings. Following media and human rights reporting, Taliban imposed strict restrictions and would investigate people traveling to and from Spin Boldak to prevent full documentation of these atrocities. In Molistan, Ghazni province, we can confirm that at least 27 civilians have been murdered in targeted killings by Taliban. In one instance, Taliban sought the help of an unarmed guard to move the bodies of civilians and then killed the guard in an attempt to remove eyewitnesses. Meanwhile, in Helmand, as I speak to you now, residents of Lashkargah are stuck between Taliban attacks and government airstrikes, fearing for their lives every minute and deprived of access to their basic rights. Also, as I speak to you today, I am mourning another attack on Afghanistan's youth. The Wakhan Minapal, a government official working on communications and a man known for his poetry, humor, and generosity, was shot in broad daylight in Kabul today. His terror sent a chilling reminder to all civilian government employees, as well as journalists and human rights defenders, about the frequency of targeted killings in the midst of the raging war. It's also a brutal reminder of Taliban's refusal to acknowledge government employees as civilians and continue to target and kill them in Kabul, Kandahar, Ghazni, and across Afghanistan. This ongoing storm of atrocities has already cost lives and has spread widespread terror and uncertainty, taking us further away from the possibility of peace. In addition to daily violation of the laws of conflict, Afghanistan's human rights gains is under attack and rapidly shrinking as the conflict expands. One major, deeply concerning example is the rights of women and girls in areas captured by the Taliban. Women's access to education, to markets, to basic health services is limited and shrinking. Their basic human rights denied and repressed. Afghan women across Afghanistan are either reliving the nightmare of Taliban era or live in the fear and trauma of reliving it soon if the tide doesn't turn and we don't have an opportunity at negotiations and meaningful participation in them. We have an equally concerning situation with access to information and freedom of expression. As media are under pressure by both sides of the conflict, independent media in different provinces are shutting down as more districts fall to Taliban. In this context, it's important to reiterate to Afghan government its obligations on protection of independent media, freedom of expression, and all fundamental human rights. I said earlier that if the violence continues, much worse is to come for Afghans and subsequently for the region and the world. But the violence need not continue. This council and its members still have the leverage to stop the bleeding of Afghans and prevent catastrophe. This council can save lives. We will need the council to utilize the full range of political, diplomatic, human rights, and humanitarian tools and interventions to save lives and prevent further and more horrific atrocities. We urge the Council, the United Nations, and international human rights mechanisms to respond with a greater sense of urgency to the Afghan calls for civilian protection, ceasefire, and end to violence, and meaningful and inclusive political process. Following the horrific attack on a girls' school in Kabul on May 8th, the Commission called for a fact-finding mission to investigate the targeted killings on civilians in Afghanistan. In July, international and national human rights organizations urged the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, to take action to support this call. In her public statement to the Council, the High Commissioner noted deterioration and called for a preventive mechanism. The European Parliament has expressed support. The Afghan government has now called for a special session of the Human Rights Council and a fact-finding mission. We support this request to recognize the urgency of the situation and to act now. These are some of the most important things a fact-finding mission would offer the Afghan people. To act as a preventive mechanism, to highlight the urgency of the threat to civilians, including femicide, massacres of religious and ethnic minorities, threats to girls' education, and targeted killings of human rights defenders. To keep victims and civilians center stage as Afghanistan heads towards a human rights and humanitarian crisis post-withdrawal. To establish the facts, identify perpetrators, preserve evidence with a view to ensuring accountability. To propose remedies for victims and effective prevention mechanisms. Mr. President, my family and I sought refuge in Pakistan when I was a child escaping conflict and Taliban's repressive regime. 24 or so years later, millions of Afghans are looking for a way out of Afghanistan as they don't see a future here. We cannot wait and watch the history repeating itself. I apologize if my remarks to this council were lengthy, repetitive, or less than coherent. I speak to you exhausted and in mourning, hoping that this time speaking to this forum will make a difference. Afghans are watching, amidst fear and despair, if this Council and the international community will do all it can to revive our hope and peace. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Akbar for her briefing. I will now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are appalled by today's assassination of the director of Afghanistan Media and Information Center and express our condolences to his loved ones. There should be no impunity for this horrendous crime. Mr. President, it is indeed timely that we meet today, and we thank you for convening this meeting. I also thank Ambassador Isaksai, Chairperson Akbar, and SRSG Alliance for their comprehensive, and I must say deeply worrying, briefings. Let me express our appreciation for all UNAMAS staff as they continue their difficult and dangerous work. The Council condemns the deplorable attack on UNAMAS offices in Herat on 30th of July. We remain extremely concerned by the significant and increased loss of life, injury, and displacement across Afghanistan in these last weeks. Let me be clear. This worrying deterioration of the situation has come about largely as a result of Taliban's military offensive, both against district capitals and more recently 3 provincial capitals in the west and in the south. These attacks are completely unacceptable. The Taliban must immediately end their ongoing military offensive. And recently reported abuses by the Taliban, including the execution of civilians in so-called revenge killings and the executions of prisoners of war, must stop. Some of these abuses may constitute war crimes. We condemn these acts unequivocally. We are also seriously concerned by reported violations by the members of the Afghan National Security and Defense Forces. The importance of ending all violence and protecting civilians, in particular children, cannot be overemphasized. Moreover, the targeting of human rights defenders and media workers is unacceptable and must stop. All parties must respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. Safe and unhindered humanitarian access remains crucial to protect and assist people in need. And all allegations of violations of human rights and international humanitarian law must be investigated and perpetrators brought to justice. President, there is no acceptable alternative to an inclusive, just and realistic political settlement, as this Council underscored in our 3rd of August press statement. We all share responsibility to put effective political and diplomatic pressure on the Taliban to engage in negotiations. We must make clear that the pursuit of victory and establishment of a new government by military force will not be accepted, and that there is no one in the international community who would support such a government. Any political solution acceptable to the international community must uphold human rights for all, in particular women and girls. Mr. President, while there is a positive complementarity between the different formats supporting the peace process, including the US-Europe meetings, as well as the extended Troika, it could also make a significant positive difference if the key international and regional stakeholders all joined together in one format to coordinate efforts and align messages. We encourage greater flexibility from relevant capitals to make this possible. In closing, let me say that Norway continues to support a strong role for the United Nations. We see the appointment of the Secretary General of the Personal Envoy for Afghanistan and regional issues as a positive step. And as we near the renewal of UNAMA's mandate, we look forward to consulting with all on how we, together, can enable the UN to play an even stronger role in supporting Afghan people's pursuit of political settlement. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Estonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start with special thanks to Ms. Akbar and the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission for your courageous work despite the current situation in Afghanistan. Hearing today about the deliberate killings of civilians, including Dawa Khan Minapal, and the mounting civilian casualties was most troubling. I would also like to thank Special Representative Lyons for all her tireless work, in particular on supporting peace talks and on the humanitarian response. Attacks against United Nations personnel and compounds such as the recent incident in Herat are utterly reprehensible and may constitute war crimes, the perpetrators of which must be brought to justice. I also welcome the participation today of Ambassador Isaksai of Afghanistan. Since the start of the ongoing Taliban offensive, in particular the assaults on population centers, the number of civilians killed and injured has reached the highest on record, with Taliban responsible for the largest share of casualties. Half the population in Afghanistan is now in need of humanitarian aid, and yet humanitarian access is shrinking and humanitarian aid providers are killed at an alarming rate. This worsening humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, which has been described in detail today, is man-made and could have been averted. Estonia reiterates the call, in particular towards the Taliban, for an immediate ceasefire to save the Afghan people from more meaningless suffering. Only a negotiated political solution can lead to a sustainable peace in the country, as well as stability in the region. The Security Council has been clear in its messaging. The Taliban and the Islamic Republic must meaningfully engage in a comprehensive and inclusive peace process in Doha. Parties must respect their obligations under international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians. There is no military solution to this conflict, and we do not support the restoration of an Islamic emirate. Mr. President, I would like to reiterate that Estonia's commitment to the people of Afghanistan remains steadfast. We emphasize the importance of the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in the peace process and wish to see the outcome of the peace process preserves constitutional protections for women's and minorities' rights. We will continue our political and financial support conditional upon the preservation of the country's human rights and democratic achievements. Any easing or lifting of sanctions must be in line with Resolution 2513. The Taliban must first demonstrate a credible commitment to peace. Estonia also welcomes the diplomatic efforts in Doha by Afghanistan's neighbors and regional powers. We encourage intensified coordinated efforts that contribute to a lasting peace in support of the people of Afghanistan. Peace and stability in Afghanistan will provide new opportunities for development and growth for the entire region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Estonia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Representative Lyons and Ms. Shahazad Akbar, for your briefings, which were particularly sobering and important to hear. And we thank Ambassador Isaksai for participating today and for your comments. The United States strongly condemns the increase in violent attacks in Afghanistan. In particular, last week's attack on a UNAMA compound in Herat and the suicide bombing targeting the home of Afghanistan's acting defense minister in Kabul. We express our deepest sympathy and condolences to those affected by these heinous attacks. Additionally, there are credible reports of attacks and retaliation against civilians in other Taliban-controlled areas. The alarming rise in violence and civilian casualties caused by the ongoing Taliban military offensive further erodes the advances the Afghan people made in democracy and the rule of law over the last 20 years. The Taliban must hear from the international community that we will not accept a military takeover of Afghanistan or a return of the Taliban's Islamic Emirate. The Taliban will be isolated and an international pariah if they choose that path, which would most certainly push the country to further violence and destruction. To echo this Council's press statement released earlier this week and the U.S.-Europe Group July 23rd statement, there is no military solution in Afghanistan, and a negotiated, inclusive political settlement through an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned process is the only way forward for lasting peace and stability in the country. This process must include the full and meaningful participation of women. We also recall this Council's Resolution 2513, which states that Taliban lack of action to further reduce violence, make sustained efforts to advance intra-Afghan negotiations, and otherwise cease to engage in or support activities that threaten the peace, stability, and security of Afghanistan will affect this Council's review of the status of designations of individuals, groups, undertakings, and entities on the list established and maintained pursuant to Resolution 1988. We urge the Taliban to immediately halt their offensive, pursue a comprehensive and sustainable political settlement, and uphold their commitments to protect Afghanistan's infrastructure and its people, especially women, girls, and other vulnerable populations. We also call on the Taliban to permit humanitarian organizations to continue their vital work in Afghanistan, particularly as the Afghan people suffer acutely from the effects of COVID-19 and drought, in addition to the violence. Let me reiterate that we express our full support for an inclusive Afghan-owned and Afghan-led peace process with full and meaningful participation of women that leads to a just and durable political settlement. A just and durable political settlement must be based at a minimum on the following 5 principles. Number 1, inclusive governance. Number 2, the right of Afghans to elect political leaders. Number 3, protections for human rights, including rights of women, youth, and minorities. 4, committing to counterterrorism, including to ensure that Afghanistan does not again serve as a safe haven for international terrorists. And 5, adherence to international law, including international humanitarian law. We emphasize that international support to any future government will depend, at least in part, on adherence to these 5 elements. And it is in the interest of all of Afghanistan's neighbors to renew support for a negotiated settlement that brings the Afghan people the peace that they so urgently deserve and creates a stable region. We welcome the role of the Secretary General's personal envoy, Jean Arnaud, is playing in support of this objective. To close, I'd like to express my appreciation for efforts taken by partners and allies to maintain international civilian and diplomatic operations in Afghanistan. We are thankful to those who have stepped up in this critical role. And as we continue with our military withdrawal from Afghanistan, we want all Afghans to know, as President Biden has stated, that we remain committed to a strong partnership with the country and its people. U.S. security assistance continues to Afghan forces, as does our development and humanitarian aid to the Afghan people. We will continue our diplomatic engagement in support of peace. We urge Afghans to remain resolute and to know that the international community is behind them. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Niger.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai l'honneur de faire cette déclaration au nom des A3+1, à savoir le Kenya, la Tunisie, Saint-Vincent-Grenadines et le Niger. Je tiens tout d'abord à remercier Mme Deborah Lyons, envoyée spéciale du secrétaire général pour l'Afghanistan, et Shahrazad Akbar, président de la Commission indépendante des droits de l'homme en Afghanistan, pour leur présentation sur les derniers développements en Afghanistan. Les A3+1 réitèrent son soutien aux efforts de stabilisation et aux bons offices déployés dans la recherche d'une solution à la crise afghane qui a évolué de manière particulièrement inquiétante ces derniers temps. Je voudrais également saisir cette occasion pour souhaiter la bienvenue au représentant permanent de l'Afghanistan et le remercier pour sa déclaration. Monsieur le Président, après des décennies de guerre, de destruction et de désolation, le peuple afghan aspire aujourd'hui à la paix. Cette aspiration est profonde et les Afghans l'ont manifesté en accueillant avec beaucoup d'espoir le début des pourparlers de paix entre Afghans en septembre 2020 à Doha. Malheureusement, ces pourparlers sont actuellement dans l'impasse et les hostilités font rage dans tout le pays. Les A3+1 soulignent que l'option militaire ne conduira pas à une solution durable acceptable par toutes les parties afghanes. Nous appelons donc les talibans et le gouvernement afghan à cesser immédiatement le feu afin de donner aux pourparlers de Doha de meilleures chances de succès. En outre, nous devons redoubler nos efforts diplomatiques au niveau régional et international afin de faciliter la reprise des négociations de paix intra-afghanes. Les A3+1 déplorent les pertes en vies humaines et les souffrances endurées par la population civile à raison de la dernière flambée de violence suite à la décision des forces internationales de quitter le pays d'ici la fin septembre de cette année. La situation humanitaire déjà précaire pourrait encore s'aggraver avec le déplacement des populations fuyant les combats en cours entre les talibans et les forces gouvernementales dans plusieurs provinces du pays, dont Kandahar, Helmand et Herat. Nous réitérons notre condamnation de l'attaque contre le complexe des Nations Unies à Herat le 30 juillet 2021. Nous condamnons également les attentats suicides commis le 4 août à Kaboul et appelons les belligérants à assurer la protection des civils, mais surtout à mettre fin aux hostilités et privilégier le dialogue. Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui plus que jamais, l'Afghanistan a besoin du soutien de l'ensemble de la communauté internationale pour l'aider à traverser cette période critique de son histoire. L'Afghanistan ne doit pas retomber dans une véritable guerre civile au risque de perdre tous les acquis démocratiques, sociaux et de développement engrangés ces dernières années. Si le rétablissement de la paix passe par un accord entre les parties en présence, l'on devrait veiller à ce que le processus de paix ne rende légitime le recours à des interventions militaires et l'association avec des organisations terroristes par une reconnaissance politique. À l'approche du 20e anniversaire des attentats du 11 septembre, nous nous rappelons comment les talibans ont été chassés du pouvoir en raison de leur soutien à Al-Qaïda. Le Conseil doit maintenant donner la priorité à la création d'incitations et de lignes rouges qui obligeraient les talibans à cesser d'utiliser le terrorisme à des fins politiques. Nous rappelons la décision de ce Conseil de scinder les listes de sanctions d'Al-Qaïda et des talibans en réponse aux efforts du gouvernement afghan pour négocier un processus de paix avec les talibans et établir une réconciliation nationale en Afghanistan. L'objectif était de fournir une bouée de sauvetage aux membres des talibans qui renoncent à la violence et se dissocient d'Al-Qaïda. Le Conseil doit donc exiger que les talibans embrassent la paix, cessent leur lien avec Al-Qaïda et ISIS et s'engagent dans le processus de paix qui transformera l'Afghanistan en un pays de paix. Les A3+1 saluent et soutiennent pleinement les bons offices des Nations Unies, de la Troïka, États-Unis, Russie, Chine et Pakistan, et tous les autres efforts diplomatiques déployés par les pays voisins pour réduire les tensions afin de parvenir à une solution négociée de la crise. En outre, Il est important de souligner que la recherche de la paix ne doit pas se faire au détriment des droits des Afghans, en particulier ceux des femmes, des enfants et des minorités ethniques et religieuses d'Afghanistan. Monsieur le Président, à l'heure où l'attention se porte sur la détérioration de la situation sécuritaire, les A3+1 souhaitent également souhaiter l'importance de trouver une solution urgente et durable à la grave crise humanitaire qui sévit déjà dans le pays. Les effets de décennies de conflits, combinés à ceux du changement climatique et de la pandémie de la COVID-19, ont créé une situation où plus d'un tiers de la population est désormais en situation d'insécurité alimentaire, avec une grande proportion d'enfants. Il est donc urgent de mobiliser les ressources supplémentaires nécessaires pour faire face à cette situation et d'appeler les donateurs à honorer leurs engagements pris dans le cadre du plan humanitaire afghan. De même, les A3+1 s'inquiètent du fait que l'insécurité croissante en Afghanistan puisse entraver les efforts du gouvernement et détourner son attention de la lutte contre la pandémie de la COVID-19 à un moment où des variants plus contagieux du virus circulent dans le monde. Nous tenons à souligner ici que la livraison et le déploiement en temps voulu des vaccins sont nécessaires de toute urgence pour protéger la population afghane en ce temps difficile. En conclusion, Monsieur le Président, les A3+1 suggèrent que nous nous posions la question suivante. Quel message envoyons-nous si nous abandonnons l'Afghanistan au moment où le pays est au bord du gouffre? En termes simples, laisser l'Afghanistan retomber dans le chaos pourrait signifier aux terroristes et aux groupes d'insurgés sur place et dans d'autres parties du monde qu'ils peuvent acquérir une légitimité et un pouvoir par le recours à la force. D'autre part, si le Conseil de sécurité doit véritablement remplir sa mission de maintien de la paix et de la sécurité internationale, nous pensons que tous les efforts doivent être faits dès maintenant pour que les principaux responsables de la violence mettent immédiatement fin à leur offensive et s'engagent résolument dans la recherche d'une solution politique négociée, inclusive et durable. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Niger for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Agradecemos las presentaciones de las señoras Lyons y Akbar, así como la del representante de Afganistán, el embajador Ghulam Isaaqzai. Como hemos escuchado, la situación en Afganistán es crítica. El reciente avance militar del Talibán ha tenido un impacto muy grave sobre la población y ha generado que cada vez más afganos deseen abandonar su país ante un futuro francamente desolador. México deplora los ataques deliberados contra defensores de derechos humanos, trabajadores humanitarios, personal del sector salud, medios de comunicación y grupos minoritarios. Es por ello que México ve con profunda preocupación el estancamiento del diálogo interafgano en Doha. Expresamos nuestro apoyo a los esfuerzos desplegados por la comunidad internacional en los planos bilateral y multilateral para revitalizar el proceso de paz e incentivar que las partes retomen el diálogo. Seguiremos con atención los resultados de la reunión de la Troika, extendida los próximos días, así como los esfuerzos del enviado personal del secretario general Jan Aknot. La comunidad internacional no puede y no debe permitir que se pierdan los avances de las últimas 2 décadas. La postura común debería ser clara: el rechazo del retorno de un emirato islámico que sea nuevamente un santuario de grupos terroristas. Tampoco es aceptable un territorio en el que no se respeten los derechos de las mujeres, de los niños o de las minorías. El futuro de Afganistán debe ser decidido democráticamente por todas y todos los afganos y no impuesto unilateralmente por vía de la fuerza. Señor presidente, México reconoce los retos a los que se enfrenta el gobierno afgano, el cual defiende con tenacidad su proyecto de nación. Es admirable la resiliencia del pueblo afgano, que en las más adversas condiciones sigue luchando por un Afganistán incluyente, democrático y pacífico. Reconocemos la dificultad que representa dialogar en condiciones tan adversas y en un contexto de grave deterioro de la seguridad. Concluyo reconociendo asimismo la delicada y compleja labor que realiza UNAMA. Manifiesto nuestro apoyo a la misión en sus esfuerzos por coordinar y facilitar la asistencia humanitaria en la protección y promoción de los derechos humanos de niñas y niños afectados por el conflicto y en especial por los avances alcanzados en la agenda de mujer, paz y seguridad, cuyos efectos en el empoderamiento de mujeres afganas deben preservarse. Muchas gracias, presidente.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас, господин председатель. Мы благодарим специального представителя Генерального секретаря и главу миссии ООН по содействию в Афганистане госпожу Дебру Лайнс за ее соображения и оценки. Отводим МАОНСа важную роль в координации международных усилий в этой стране. Внимательно выслушали постоянного представителя Афганистана при ООН, посла Гулама Исакзая, и оценки, которые он дал. Благодарим представительницу Афганской независимой комиссии по правам человека, госпожу Шахарзад Акбар, за ее выступление. Господин председатель, деградирующая ситуация в Афганистане вызывает все большую обеспокоенность. На фоне вывода иностранных войск расклад сил выглядит неутешительно. Приводят в ужас получаемые нами новости об эскалации насилия. Жертвами продолжающегося конфликта практически ежедневно становятся гражданские лица, включая женщин и детей. Вот и сегодня мы узнали об убийстве главы информационного центра правительства Афганистана. Мы хотели бы выразить наши глубокие соболезнования всем родным и близким всех невинно убитых гражданских лиц в Афганистане. Внутриполитическая нестабильность за последние годы способствовала сохранению в стране террористической угрозы. За этот период в Афганистане появился ИГИЛ Хорасан, чьи теракты продолжают сотрясать страну. Боевики сохраняют спящие ячейки на севере и востоке, наращивают потенциал для укрепления своего влияния в стране и перетока терроактивности из государства в регион Центральной Азии. Рекордными темпами растет и наркопроизводство. Риск инфильтрации боевиков в регион, в том числе под видом беженцев, не может не вызывать обеспокоенности и у наших центральноазиатских соседей. Находимся в регулярном контакте со всеми 5 странами Центральной Азии. Как никогда востребованным остается сотрудничество в рамках региональных организаций ОДКБ и ШОС, включая рабочую группу ОДКБ по Афганистану и обновленный механизм контактной группы ШОС Афганистан. Господин председатель, очевидно, что военного решения афганской проблемы не существует. Но в нынешней ситуации отсутствие прогресса на переговорном треке, перспектива скатывания Афганистана в полномасштабную и затяжную гражданскую войну, к сожалению, вполне реальна. Поэтому важнейшая задача сегодня – скорейший запуск субстантивных переговоров. Россия многое сделала для старта процесса нацпримирения и выхода на прямой межафганский диалог. Продолжаем работать с обеими сторонами. Провели в Москве переговоры с афганской делегацией во главе с советником президента Афганистана по нацбезопасности господином Махимом 2 июля, а также с делегацией политофиса движения талибов 8-9 июля. Рассчитываем, что очередная встреча в Дохе 11 августа в формате «Тройка плюс Пакистан» придаст дополнительный импульс процессу мирного урегулирования. Убеждены, что сейчас как никогда важна консолидация всех международных и региональных усилий. Все шаги должны быть направлены на поиск разумных компромиссных развязок, учитывающих интересы всех этнических и религиозных меньшинств. Однако вопрос будущего политического устройства может быть решен только самими афганцами. При этом призыв продолжать проявлять гибкость, не на словах, а на деле, должен быть обращен ко всем сторонам. Исходим из того, что ставка на взаимные обвинения едва ли будет способствовать этой задаче. Господин председатель, единый и стабильный Афганистан, свободный от терроризма и наркотиков, необходим прежде всего самим афганцам, но также и всему региону. В нем ключ к его экономическому развитию и процветанию. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Representative Deborah Lyons and Ms. Shahra Akbar for their comprehensive briefing. I welcome the presence of the permanent representative of Afghanistan to our meeting today and thank for his statement. Mr. President, I would like to focus my statement today on the following 4 points. First, we are deeply concerned about the situation on the ground. Violent and civilian casualties have reached highest levels since the beginning of the year, while the intra-Afghan peace negotiations have shown very limited progress. We would like to reiterate our position that there can be no military solution to the current crisis. Sustainable peace and stability in Afghanistan can only be achieved through a comprehensive and durable political settlement. In this regard, it is crucial that the relevant party achieve a permanent ceasefire as soon as possible, thereby putting an end to the ongoing violence and creating a conducive environment to the current peace negotiation. Furthermore, we call on the relevant party to continue to set aside their differences, build confidence, and reach a timely political settlement to the conflict with full and meaningful participation of Afghan women and youth. We note with appreciation the joint declaration by the party on July 18 to accelerate high-level engagement to find a timely solution and look forward to seeing practical progress. Second, we strongly condemn the attacks on the civilians, including women, children, students, humanitarian workers, civil servants, and UN personnel in the past month. This is unacceptable. We express our deep condolences to the family of the victim and to the government and the people of Afghanistan. It is imperative that all relevant parties fully respect international humanitarian laws, immediately stop targeting civilian and civilian objects, particularly those indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. We gratefully condemn the attack against the UN compound in Harras on July 30, 2021. The safety and security of UN personnel and compound must be ensured. We also share the concern on the increasing negative impact of the conflict in Afghanistan on the security situation in the region, especially the country neighboring to Afghanistan. To this end, it is equally important to prevent further exacerbation of such impact and address the related challenges for peace and stability in the region. And third, we share our deep concerns about the increasingly dire humanitarian situation in the country. The country had reached critical level of food insecurity, affecting over 50% of Afghanistan population. We call on the UN, regional and international partners to continue to strengthen its humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan in this regard to ensure its projected needs. And at the same time, the international community should continue to support the government of Afghanistan in promoting socio-economic development and reconstruction of the country. We commend the efforts to improve economic development, livelihood assistance, and healthcare system of Afghanistan in this difficult time of the COVID-19 pandemic. We wish to see further support for the country in its fight against the pandemic, including the vaccination process. We also commend the United Nations Migrant Action Service and partners for their continued efforts to facilitate migrant clearance and education activities in Afghanistan. And fourth, the support from the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, and regional and international partners will remain critical to promote tangible progress in the peace talks. We look forward to the outcome of the upcoming Troika Plus meeting on Afghanistan in Doha on August 11. Furthermore, we wish to see further collaboration between UNAMA and the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Afghanistan in supporting the peace process. In closing, Mr. President, Vietnam would like to reiterate our full support for the pursuit of peace, stability, and development in Afghanistan. We reaffirm our support for the work of UN, UNAMA, and for Special Envoy, Ms. Lyon. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Vietnam for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you also, Special Representative Lyons, for your deeply worrying but really important briefing. And I thank also Ambassador Isaac Tsai. Thank you for your participation here today. I would like to express my appreciation also to Ms. Akbar for addressing this Council once again and for her sobering words. I want to begin by joining others in condemning, in the strongest terms, recent attacks in Afghanistan, including on the UN compound in Herat last Friday. We join others also in condemning the assassination of Dawa Khan Menopal. Our thoughts are with the families of those killed, and we wish those injured a swift recovery. Mr. President, there is real urgency to our discussion today. As SRSG Lyons so powerfully attested, this Council needs to come together and needs to act. The Afghan people are suffering devastating levels of violence. Afghanistan has been the most dangerous country in the world for civilians and children for some years now, but UNAMA's mid-year report on the protection of civilians has documented record levels of civilian casualties, as Ms. Akbar also highlighted. The scale of the recent violence we have seen against civilians is truly shocking. Mr. President, the Taliban must end their military offensive, which is causing such suffering, commit to a comprehensive ceasefire, and engage constructively in peace negotiations to reach a just and inclusive political settlement. The Doha process has the support of the international community and remains our best hope at achieving the peace that the Afghan people so clearly demand and deserve. We deeply regret the failure of the Taliban to engage meaningfully in talks. We reiterate that there can be no military solution. Violence begets only violence. Nowhere more than Afghanistan have we seen this. All sides must commit to a better future for Afghanistan and a negotiated settlement that guarantees inclusive governance, human rights protections, especially for women, young people and minorities, and adherence to international law, including international humanitarian law. Afghanistan must never again become a haven for international terrorism. To succeed, we know that Afghanistan's peace process must also be inclusive, led and owned by Afghans. To achieve this, all Afghans, men, women, youth, minorities, and civil society must be allowed to participate equally and meaningfully in shaping their future. Ireland stands by Security Council Resolution 2513 on Afghanistan. Along with our EU partners, our position on current and future support to the Afghan government requires adherence to the principles set out in the 2020 Afghanistan Partnership Framework. We strongly encourage Afghanistan's neighbours and regional states to support the Afghan people and to use their influence to promote a lasting peace that benefits all. We welcome the engagement of the Secretary-General's personal envoy in building regional consensus. Mr. President, let's be clear. The deliberate targeting of civilians constitutes a war crime and it must end. All parties must uphold their responsibility to protect civilians, especially children. Perpetrators of violations of international humanitarian law and of human rights abuses and violations must be brought to justice. We share the deep concern expressed by others at the troubling human rights situation. The past 2 decades have seen the emergence of a vibrant Afghan civil society, which is now under threat from deliberate and disturbing attacks. Ireland unequivocally condemns these attacks, which target the very fabric of Afghan society. Violence and intimidation against women and girls is threatening their ability to participate in all aspects of Afghan society. This Council must stand with them. Ireland and Mexico will host a meeting of the informal expert group on women, peace and security on Afghanistan this month to advance the efforts of the Council to address the situation facing Afghan women. The surge in violence is increasing the number of internally displaced persons, as the SRSG noted, and exacerbating the profound challenges faced by more than 18 million people in need of humanitarian aid in Afghanistan, who are already grappling with devastating food insecurity and the effects of COVID-19. Humanitarian actors need access and protection. In conclusion, SRSG Lines, I want to pay tribute to UNAMA's work in these most difficult circumstances. The UN's commitment to hold firm and serve the people of Afghanistan is unstinting, and we look forward to working with Council members on the UNAMA mandate renewal over the coming weeks. We, the international community, must continue to stand with the people of Afghanistan to collectively and urgently find a way forward that meets their aspirations for peace and protects their rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Je tiens d'abord à vous remercier pour l'organisation de cette réunion à un moment particulièrement critique pour l'Afghanistan. Et je remercie Deborah Lyons ainsi que Shahrazad Akbar pour leur présentation particulièrement poignante. Je salue également la présence parmi nous du représentant permanent de l'Afghanistan. La France condamne avec la plus grande fermeté les récentes attaques, de plus en plus nombreuses, qui ont endeuillé les Afghans et les Nations Unies, dont l'emprise à Herat a été touchée la semaine dernière. L'assassinat ce matin du chef de service de la communication du gouvernement vient s'ajouter à la longue liste de crimes abominables commis au cours des dernières semaines. Nous avons entendu de Deborah Lyons, de Shahrazad Akbar et du représentant permanent de l'Afghanistan l'extrême gravité de la situation. Nous l'avons dit maintes fois, dans cette enceinte, le niveau de violence actuel n'est pas acceptable. La paix ne peut se construire au milieu du chaos, de la violence et de la barbarie. Chaque nouvel attentat amoindrit les chances de paix. Nous appelons donc les responsables de cette violence, les talibans, à mettre fin à leur offensive militaire, à réduire immédiatement la violence, comme ils s'y sont engagés. La paix ne saurait être possible sans un cessez-le-feu préalable pour garantir des discussions apaisées. Les rapports récents, et notamment ceux de la MANUA, dont je salue ici le travail absolument remarquable, montrent une augmentation des attaques contre les civils et une gradation dans la barbarie. La protection des civils, en particulier des femmes et des enfants, la protection des infrastructures civiles sont une priorité absolue. J'aimerais rappeler que nous ne saurions accepter que les responsables de ces exactions restent impunis. Ils devront rendre compte de leurs crimes. Il ne saurait y avoir d'impunité face aux violations massives des droits de l'homme et du droit international humanitaire. Nous savons qui sont les responsables de cette barbarie, ce sont les talibans. Ils ont pris des engagements et nous attendons de leur part qu'ils les respectent, que ce soit en faveur de la réduction de la violence ainsi que de la rupture de tout lien avec les groupes terroristes. À cet égard, je rappelle que la liste du comité de sanctions 1988 ne saurait être modifiée qu'à l'aune de l'engagement réel en faveur de la paix de tous ceux qui y sont inscrits. Cette dégradation vient s'ajouter à une situation humanitaire extrêmement préoccupante elle aussi. Les conséquences de l'épidémie de Covid-19 continuent à se faire sentir en Afghanistan, ainsi que celle de la sécheresse. La souffrance de la population afghane doit être entendue et une aide apportée. Et pour cela, l'accès des personnels médicaux et humanitaires à l'ensemble des personnes dans le besoin, de même que leur protection, doivent être garantis. Le respect du droit international humanitaire, des droits de l'homme et de la liberté de la presse par toutes les parties n'est pas négociable. Enfin, Monsieur le Président, je souhaiterais rappeler que la paix ne saurait être durable sans respecter plusieurs conditions. Les discussions doivent se faire dans un environnement apaisé, confiant. Elles doivent se faire en présence de tous ceux concernés et sur la base des gains démocratiques de ces 20 dernières années. Je pense en particulier aux femmes qui ont toute leur place et nous attendons que tous les formats de négociation convoqués leur permettent une participation pleine et entière. En conclusion, Monsieur le Président, je voudrais rappeler que la France est déterminée à se tenir aux côtés de l'Afghanistan et de tous ses partenaires pour contribuer à faire progresser le chemin de la paix. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank Special Representative Lyons and Ms. Akbar for your briefings, and I welcome the Permanent Representative of Afghanistan. Mr. President, first, it is clear that the Taliban's military offensive has entered a new and more dangerous phase, with the risk of civil war and implications for Afghanistan's neighbours. There is evidence of summary killings, government officials dragged from their homes, and assassination, including tragically yesterday of Dawaka Manapal, the director of Afghanistan's Media and Information Centre. And we send our condolences to all the bereaved families. We're also concerned by evidence of Taliban human rights abuses, including of minority groups and women, including forced marriage, using civilians as human shields, and attacks on the UN buildings. These acts could constitute war crimes, and we will work with international partners to hold the Taliban to account. The Security Council therefore should leave the Taliban in no doubt that there will be consequences for them if they continue to pursue this military offensive. There can be no military solution to this conflict. For our part, the UK will not recognise a Taliban government that comes to power by force. If the Taliban want political power, they need to engage meaningfully in a peace process. We're clear too about the standards we expect any government to adhere to. As Prime Minister Johnson made clear on the 8th of July, we continue to support the government of the Republic of Afghanistan, their national defence forces, and to provide humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan. But the UK will not provide aid to a government that does not respect and uphold human rights, including the rights of women and minority groups. The Taliban should understand that. We also recall Resolution 2513, agreed by this Council, which stated that any easing of sanctions will depend on the Taliban making sustained efforts to embrace peace. Against this background, the opportunity to lift peace talks out of stalemate in Doha next week is critical. We encourage all parties, including the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan, other parties, neighbours, and the international community to engage and support in good faith an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned search for peace. Afghanistan's neighbours and the regional organisations to which they belong have an important supporting role to play in this process, as does this Council. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席先生。我感谢莱恩斯特别代表的通报，认真听取了阿富汗独立人权委员会主席阿克巴尔女士的发言。我也欢迎阿富汗常驻代表伊萨克扎伊大使出席今天的会议并发言。阿富汗局势正处在战争与和平的历史性转折关头，受美国和北约仓促撤军的影响，阿富汗近期暴力事件增多，平民人数、伤亡人数上升，安全形势更趋严峻。20年的阿富汗战争造成了数万名阿富汗平民丧生，上千万人流离失所，成为难民，但和平却迟迟没有到来。事实再次证明，阿富汗问题没有军事解决方案，任何外部势力对阿富汗的强权干涉都注定以失败告终。结合当前形势，中方认为当务之急有3点：一是避免战火扩大，防止发生全面内战；停火止暴，安享和平，是阿富汗人民的最大渴望，也是地区国家和国际社会的共同期盼。中方谴责针对平民和民用设施的暴力袭击，呼吁各方保持克制，停止军事对抗，早日达成全面停火。外国部队应该和阿富汗政府就撤出后的安排充分协商，以负责任方式确保阿富汗局势平稳过渡，同时对地区国家增强透明度，不能留下一堆问题一走了之。美国最近表示愿帮助阿富汗维稳防乱，希望美方切实履行承诺，加大投入。二是合力助推和平和解进程。政治解决是阿富汗问题的唯一出路，不应该以武力强行在建立政府。中方欢迎阿富汗政府同塔利班近期在多哈恢复对话，并同意就继续进行高级别和谈并加快谈判进程达成一致。希望谈判双方显示灵活，求同存异，尽快明确实现和解的路线图和时间表。我们期待阿富汗浴火重生，建立广泛包容的政权架构，奉行温和稳健的穆斯林政策，致力于同所有邻国友好相处。中方愿适时举办阿人内部谈判，为和平进程提供支持和便利。三是防止恐怖势力趁机做大。恐怖主义仍然是阿富汗和地区国家面临的严峻挑战。伊斯兰国、基地组织、东伊运、巴基斯坦塔利班等受安理会列明的恐怖组织，仍在境内频频发动恐怖袭击。国际社会绝不能让阿富汗再度成为恐怖分子的聚居地，应继续支持阿富汗安全部队加强反恐能力建设。塔利班应确立和平目标，彻底同恐怖组织切断联系。各国应根据国际法和安理会决议履行义务，加强合作，共同打击一切恐怖主义。主席先生，国际社会应在尊重阿人主导、阿人所有原则基础上加强协调，为推动和平和解进程贡献正能量。中方将继续通过中美俄加磋商机制、上海合作组织阿富汗联络组等机制，同有关各方密切协调，形成合力。国际社会应继续支持阿富汗发展重建，帮助阿富汗开展区域合作，加强互联互通，增强自主发展能力。发达国家应切实履行承诺，继续向阿富汗提供发展和人道援助，特别是当前急需的抗疫援助。中方积极支持阿富汗政府抗击疫情，援阿的70万剂新冠疫苗、呼吸机、 麻醉机等医疗物资前不久已运抵喀布尔。近期我们还将追加援助100万剂疫苗。中方赞赏莱恩斯特别代表和联阿援助团为支持阿富汗和平和解与经济重建发挥的重要作用。在当前形势下，联阿团工作环境面临严峻挑战。中方强烈谴责7月30日在阿富汗赫拉特省发生的针对联合国办公场所的袭击事件，呼吁各方遵守国际法，保护联合国工作人员安全。对下阶段联合国在阿存在形势如何安全履职，安理会应尽早考虑并作出妥善安排。谢谢主席先生。
I thank the representative of China for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of India. I would like to thank SRSG Deborah Lyons for her detailed briefing. I also thank the permanent representative of Afghanistan for his statement. I would also like to thank Ms. Shahrazad Akbar for her briefing. As a neighbor of Afghanistan, the current situation prevailing in the country is of great concern to us. The violence shows no signs of abating. The report of the United Nations makes it clear that civilian casualties and targeted killings have reached record levels. There have been targeted attacks on religious and ethnic minorities, girl students, Afghan security forces, ulemas, women occupying positions of responsibility, journalists, civil rights activists, and the youth. As we saw recently, even the UN compound has not been spared. The residence of the Defense Minister of Afghanistan has been attacked. An Indian journalist was murdered while he was reporting. And the fighting continues in Helmand, Herat, and elsewhere. More than 100 Afghan civilians were mercilessly killed in Spin Baldog. The rapid deterioration of the security situation in Afghanistan constitutes a serious threat to regional peace and stability. It is therefore time for the international community, and in particular this Council, to take stock of the situation and decide on actions that would help bring a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire and ensure an immediate cessation of violence. Anything short of this will constitute a serious threat to regional peace and security. I would like to recall here what our External Affairs Minister said to this Council in June. A durable peace in Afghanistan requires a genuine double peace, that is, peace within Afghanistan and peace around Afghanistan. It requires harmonizing the interests of all, both within and around the country. India has been supportive of all efforts being made to accelerate the dialogue between the Afghan government and Taliban, including the intra-Afghan negotiations. If the peace process is to be successful, then it is necessary to ensure that the Taliban engage in negotiations in good faith, eschew the path of violence, sever ties with the Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations, and fully commit itself towards reaching a political solution. Violence and military threat cannot be used to strengthen the negotiating position. A tangible demonstration of this commitment is required. India wishes to see an independent, peaceful, sovereign, democratic, stable, and prosperous Afghanistan. I would like to reiterate our support for an inclusive, Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled peace process. Any political arrangement or settlement in Afghanistan must ensure that the gains of the last 2 decades are protected and not reversed. These gains are non-negotiable. It should therefore preserve the constitutional democratic framework and ensure the protection of the rights of women, children, and minorities. Any regime devoid of legitimacy in Afghanistan would find it difficult to garner the much-needed humanitarian and developmental assistance from the international donor community. We, as the international community, cannot afford to set the clock back. The future of Afghanistan cannot be its past. We support a leading role for the United Nations and call on the Secretary General to take an initiative towards finding a lasting and durable outcome. We welcome any move towards a genuine political settlement that leads to these objectives. The only way forward are negotiations that will provide an acceptable compromise, reflecting the Doha process, the Moscow format, and Istanbul process. For enduring peace in Afghanistan, terrorist safe havens and sanctuaries in the region must be dismantled immediately and terrorist supply chains disrupted. It needs to be ensured that Afghanistan's neighbors and the region are not threatened by terrorism, separatism, and extremism. There needs to be zero tolerance for terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. It is equally important to ensure that the territory of Afghanistan is not used by terrorist groups to threaten or attack any other country. Those providing material and financial support to terrorist entities must be held accountable. We, as the international community, must ensure that our commitments to Afghanistan, including to its various institutions, are maintained. On India's part, we will continue to stand with Afghanistan in ensuring that peace and stability is restored through a legitimate and transparent democratic process that is essential for the long-term stability of Afghanistan and the region. We will continue to provide all support to Afghanistan in realizing their aspirations for a peaceful, democratic, and prosperous future, free of terror, where the rights and in interests of all sections of the Afghan society are promoted and protected. Thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I will now adjourn the meeting so that the Council can continue its discussions on the subject in closed consultations. And I would kindly ask all observers to exit the chamber directly upon the adjournment of this meeting. The meeting is adjourned.